It was almost 3 p.m. The sun glared over the pier, and as the car pulled up, the tension swiftly began to rise. "You don't have the money, you get out of my car," yelled the driver angrily. This was the third or fourth time he had dealt with this particular client, and he had reached a breaking point. A distressed but masculine voice could be heard from the back seat of the car. He desperately tried to explain to Pablo why he should still be helped. "Pablo, I swear, I will find some way to pay you back when we get there. Please don't abandon me now, especially when we've already gotten this far. The end is in sight." Unfortunately, though, Pablo was already beyond the point of reasoning. Enough was enough. The passenger, Felipe, didn't have any money, so Pablo would do what he has always done with fare-dodging passengers for the past 15 years of his career. Kick them out wasn't remotely his responsibility. Pablo had kindly gotten him through the border and had also previously offered aid to Felipe and his family. Now it was time to cut ties loose. Felipe and his family, his wife Camila and their son Samuel stared blankly as Felipe drove off and accelerated long into the distance. They were now on American soil, but they owed Pablo $10,000, so they would have to continue the journey alone. The beach was lovely and picturesque, but fairly brisk due to the time of the year. Samuel started to get increasingly cold, so Camila wrapped him warm and positioned his wheelchair in a way that angled the warmer sea breeze toward him in an attempt to combat the cold. Talking to himself, he mumbled some thoughts. He didn't even realize that he was saying them aloud. "I didn't like the idea from the beginning. If I'm honest, we should have tried to find a cure for him back in our own country. Sure would have saved a pile of money." Unfortunately for Felipe, Camila had heard his mumbling and wasn't particularly pleased about it. Contentiously, she reminded him for the 50th time that they had already tried the doctors back in Afghanistan. They were great and very kind, but didn't have the necessary facilities or treatments. However, they had heard that these treatments were readily available in America, which is why they had invested so much in going there. The sheer audacity of Felipe to brush this off and complain about the chance of their son recovering was out of order. Felipe, to nobody's surprise, was depressed about this and quickly retaliated. The cracks in their relationship promptly started to deepen due to the stresses of Samuel's illness. "And look where we are now. We have no money and are stranded with our..." Raging, Felipe kicked Samuel's wheelchair, which caused it to jolt him forward, causing immense pain. Camila, much like Pablo earlier, had reached a breaking point. She understood his anger and shared the sentiment in many ways. But taking this built-up rage out on their son, who was already suffering enough, no way in hell she would let that slide. A fight began to erupt, and sensing this tension, Samuel tried his best to calm his mother down. "Don't answer him, Mom. Just leave it." "But he hurt you, and I need to teach him a lesson. Nobody hurts my son." "Mom, listen to me for once, for crying out loud. Mom, listen." "I hate it. I hate it when you two fight. It makes me feel even worse. So just stop." The next few days were tense. Felipe did his best to put aside the previous anger to find a place for the family to stay. After a few weeks, Felipe just about manages to get enough money to rent out a small room/attic in a nearby town. Settling in was proving difficult, but it would have to work somehow. To try and be comfortable, Samuel lies down on some cardboard and sits with his mum, staring blankly at the rotting ceiling. Felipe would have customarily joined in with this, but his anger was still circulating within him. "You never failed to keep my spirits up, but I think it would be best if I meet my end. We have tried everything feasibly possible, and continuing this endeavor is tearing you and Dad apart. I don't want to be remembered as the cause of your divorce, not after 22 years of happy marriage before I came along and ruined it when I was born." "Don't you dare say that again. This is a country of peace and prosperity. There's no corruption, and very kind-hearted and good people live here." The medicine, doctors, everything. I am 110% sure that we will find help for you. When have we ever let you down?" Deep down, she didn't want him to answer that, and meant it to be rhetorical. Camila and Felipe had let Samuel down so often that it was hard to keep count these days. Before he could reply, Felipe interjected, infuriated by Samuel's comments. He never wanted to hear this again. He was determined not to give up. He had gotten into debt and traveled half across the world for nothing. He loved his son and would do anything for him. "Stop feeding him these lies, Camila. He's a grown-up already and understands the situation as clearly as day. We are both in the wrong, and as much as I hate to admit I am wrong, our son's life is at stake. Let's be realistic and sort this out, okay?" "You're a good father, Felipe. We all know that. We are a strong family, just cracked and in need of repair. I think Samuel's recovery is the perfect repair. Please, don't give up. We are close to our goal." Another long time passed, and they had finally reached a doctor's surgery. There was hope, at last, that Samuel would get better. The doctor and Camila talk for a while, but forget that Samuel is in the room. He overhears, and it upsets him because they speak depressingly. "I understand your situation. We can make some discounts for you, but you have no insurance. I have already slashed the cost of the treatment in half, but I don't know if it will be enough. $200 is the absolute best I can do. I'm doing the best that I can to help. Can I please see your documents?" Camila began to cry. "I don't have any documents." The doctor looks and sighs. "Look, I've been as upfront as possible with you. Maybe come back when you have located your documents." Little did he realize that they would have to travel hundreds of miles to find them. Camila continued to cry. Her luck had honestly run out. "Mom, don't cry. We shouldn't have come here. I will die here anyway. Now we have no money, no family at all. It's all because of me. Dad was right after all." It was a rainy and bitter New Year's Eve. The night sky was starless and dim, which wasn't typical for the area. After making a stop at a local gas station, Pablo was on a drive when he pulled into a hotel to pick up a predetermined passenger. No name was given, just the address and the time. In all the years that Pablo had been cabbing, this had never happened before, and it was very suspicious to him. A silhouette got into the car, and Pablo began to drive. A faint but familiar voice pierced through Pablo's soul. He had never expected to hear this voice again. "You killed my son." He looked around. It was Felipe in the back of the taxi. His face was crumpled but tense. You bastard. You kicked us out of the taxi at the border. We had no chance but to seek out the closest doctor, and he couldn't save him. If you had driven us a bit further, my boy would be here today." Pablo was equally angry. He had no intention of killing Samuel and was upset by the news. Unfortunately, Felipe was too far gone to acknowledge this or care. He had it in his head that Pablo had killed him, and now the $10,000 he owed him was the least of his problems. Felipe wasn't necessarily known for being violent, but he could do all sorts when he was pushed. He had known Pablo for over a decade and considered him a dear friend. A dear friend of the past, though. He could not forgive him for what he had done and could not live with himself if he let Pablo live. "You killed my son, and now he's gone. My life is dead and my wife has left me. Even if she blames you, our revenge was the last thing we agreed on. You will never see that $10,000 we owe you. You will never see the light of day again. End of the road, Pablo. Wasn't friendly knowing you."
"It's a medical emergency, and we will need another abdominal surgery right now," said the doctor, to save the kid's life. It seems that a dead angel was roaming the hospital's corridors. The doctors were running their best efforts to save the poor children. It appeared that they had some intestinal infection, but the gastroenterologist revealed a severe gastrointestinal illness leading to the emulsion of fungi spores. The blood reports claim that the fungus spores are rapidly approaching hundreds and thousands in number. Therefore, the blood texture and skin color were gradually turning pale green. For the first time in history, Mr. Mickelson was up to something that lies beyond the boundaries of his competence. He is a well-known gastroenterologist and a nutritionist in the town. He led the case of 3 children who got admitted last night. The condition of these 3 mates was terrible at the time of admission. The eldest one was a 12-year-old boy named Jay, an 8-year-old girl named Alexa, and a 3-year-old toddler, Alini. Miss Steve reported these 3 children. She called out her friends to help her out with the matter. Miss Steve is an old friend of Carla and the mother of Jay, Alexa, and Alini. Carla and her husband, Suzanne, divorced each other last summer. To earn bread and butter, Carla worked in the neighboring town. By profession, she was in charge of the production line in the main center of California. She was supposed to work at the production house for about 3 weeks a month. Meanwhile, her dear old friend, Miss Steve, used to take care of her children when Carla wasn't at home. Miss Steve and Carla's children shared an inevitable bond. Her kids adore Steve's presence, and she enjoys the pleasant, innocent aura of the children. When Carla worked in the field, Miss Steve was the only one cooking and cleaning for her children. Miss Steve was a researcher who believed in the concept of a microbiome diet. A diet was rich in protein, organic supplements, and a lactose-free diet. She is believed to have built a special microbiome diet to revive her name in the Guinness Book of World Records. She was the only one who raised her obligations in favor of ingesting some potential parasites and fungus into the digestive tract of humans. Initially, the Public Research Board rejected her proposal, but a strong alliance later joined her. This was Dr. Mickelson, the handsome bachelor with brown eyes and dusky color. His sharp nose, bright eyes, and perfect physique were enough to seduce the town's women. Like others, Miss Steve was also one of the huge fans of Mr. Mickelson. Steve jumped into the research without considering any facts and figured it was enough that a hot, charismatic man would assist her side. Working in his extravagant laboratory was an incredible honor for Miss Steve. They worked together for months and prepared a manual named The Vegan Diet. The manual aims to bring harmony to the internal functioning of humanity. Initially, it was tested on 100 people, and luckily all benefited. Most sample people were cured of heart disease, blood infections, and other gastrointestinal issues. The diet became famous as the Miracle Diet. Mr. Mickelson and Steve were honored by the chief of the city. Success and appreciation were there for them, but Steve always wanted the experiment his way. A short, heightened woman wearing glasses with a cracked mind that no one knows was standing among the people briefing her research and future goals in the community center, and she was Miss Steve. On the way back to her friend's home, her thoughts were mingling across her mind. My idea of adding octopus stinkhorn in the microbiome diet is working, and people are getting benefits. What if I increase the amount of octopus stinkhorn in the diet? Consequently, more and more people will be turning towards veganism, she said to herself with an evil smile on her face. The car stopped in the garage, and the lights were off as usual. Stepping ahead towards the door, there was an unusual silence over there. Searching for keys from her bag, the door opened by itself, and there was a suspicious expression on Steve's face. Surprise! This was Carla standing in front of Steve with a bottle of champagne, ready to celebrate her best friend's success. Ah, You just gave me a heart attack, dear, Steve said with a smile and immediately hugged her best friend. Stepping into a hallway, a big dinner was ready for the celebration. The aroma of garlic bread with Russian salad was complimentary for the night, and was a decent smell of baked turkey with the cheesiest mac and cheese. Everyone settled down along with their kids. There was laughter, jokes, and a memorable time being kneaded into a mesmerizing portrait. There were mutual friends and Carla's kids at the table. Among the chattering, shrill voice raised, "Can you cook something for us, please?" with a smile. This was a tiny sweetheart named Alexa. "Why not, love?" Steve stood up from her seat and paid the little one's hair while making charming eye contact with her. "Why not a microbiome diet?" Carla suggested, "a glass of champagne." "Yeah, the Bayside porridge," Jay recommended with enthusiasm. Steve gave a smile and stood back in the kitchen. She was cooking something great for the pretty customer, Jay and Alexa. Carla was quite drunk, and she went to bed. The kids were waiting for the delicious meal on the table. "Food is here," said Steve. There was joy, and the kids filled their plates with the meal. It was warm green and tasted like green seaweeds, a punch of tomatoes, and Steve's unique vegan capsules. The kids adored the taste, and nothing was left on their plates within one go. Steve collected the dishes and asked the kids to settle in their beds. 3 of them greeted good night, and with a warm thank you, they returned to the room. Piling up the plates, she thought it was time to introduce my vegan capsules to the world. There are no side effects on the kids. For a long time, Steve was working to turn down the kids into veganism. She dreamt of the world being vegan. Therefore, she initiated her career with Dr. Mickelson. By gaining his support, she was able to research actual human subjects. Before practicing, Steve has already concluded by practicing them on Jay, Alini, and Alexa. The 3 kids were being fed vegan food, but by tonight, Steve took one step ahead by adding the octopus fingers to their diet. The one she believes that there are miraculous properties to increasing human metabolism. If the plan works, my name will be the only name in the vegan history. While piling up her thoughts, she stepped into the kids' room to check whether everything was okay or not. She entered the room, and there was silence. She turned on the light to collect a blood sample from 3 of them to study. The kids were unconsciously lying on the floor. "This is terrible," she said to herself. "What am I going to do?" She turned over to Jay. His skin color turned green. She checked the heartbeat, and the heartbeat was dropping down. Unfortunately, she couldn't detect the heartbeat of Alexa and Alina. "What have I done?" Steve was shivering, and she called 911 for immediate medical help. This was quite pathetic. She took Carla and went to the hospital. Mickelson told Steve that the 2 girls were no more, and they tried their best to save Jay. Something poisonous was added to their meal, and the doctor knew it must be the evil Steve. He informed the police to draw further investigation. Before the police arrived, Steve admitted that it was her fault and she was the murderer. Carla was in great shock by this night. She had lost her girls and a best friend who was evil in disguise. The doctors were working quite hard to save Jay, while the higher authorities declared Steve a death sentence. We have to pay a heavy debt of extremism and radicalism. The radicalism belief system in our society needs to be changed, as history reveals it's not good for humanity. The weight on one side can be a disaster. Therefore, there is always an end to a healthy balance. And Steve deserves the consequences, ultimately. Sometimes our passion grew into our obsession that led us towards extremism, and then we lost control of ourselves and our kind. Therefore, we must always watch our path, emotions, and passion.
The first day of spring turned out to be extremely damp and dank. The same gray and boring was the life of a young woman who looked out of the window longingly this early morning. Elizabeth was sitting on the sagging sofa in the tiny kitchen, drinking cold tea and finishing a piece of yesterday's apple pie. Today, she turned 31 years old, and this simple breakfast on the kitchen table was all she could afford at the moment. Before blowing out the candle, she thought about what to wish for and whispered aloud the cherished words, "I want life in our family to get better." The cake seemed tasteless to the birthday girl, and the tea tasteless. It used to be different, and it was not at all about the variety of apples or cinnamon. Elizabeth was widowed a year ago. Her husband Steve was knocked down by a pedestrian crossing by some scoundrel when he was returning home from work. It was in the evening, and none of the random passers-by remembered the car's license plate number. Elizabeth found out about the tragedy in the morning when she returned from the night shift. They'd had a happy marriage. The lack of money and eternal debts did not prevent the spouses from sincerely loving each other. They'd been together since high school. The awkward junior in high school named Steve immediately liked a classmate who transferred to the school from another school. For her sake, Steve fell in love with reading books, became interested in classical music, and became interested in sports. Now, it was difficult to recognize Steve because love transformed him. Trying to match his beloved, Steve began to take part in the social life of the school, carefully prepared homework, and stayed up late in the library. But that's not how Steve won Elizabeth's heart. She was always there at a difficult moment, and Elizabeth quickly got used to the fact that she could always rely on him. Unbeknownst to herself, she fell in love with this shy young man who on the day they met could not connect two words. After finishing school, Steve and Elizabeth decided not to break up and entered the same university together. But the trouble is, Steve couldn't keep up his grades and joined the army. Elizabeth was not at all frightened by the difficulties that arose, and she firmly decided to wait for her beloved. The year flew by unnoticed, and when Steve paid his debt to the motherland, he and Elizabeth got married. 9 months later, they had a new baby, who they named Andrew. After a while, Elizabeth was forced to transfer to the correspondence department, and Steve got a job as a handyman at a construction site. At first, everything went like clockwork, and the young family had enough money. They even managed to save money. Everything collapsed in an instant when Steve lost a high-paying job. It turned out that his boss was illegally building a housing complex in the city center. The news that Elizabeth's mother Margaret was seriously ill finally upset their family. Margaret was diagnosed with cancer, and the woman needed an urgent operation. All the savings of their young family went to her treatment and rehabilitation. She even had to sell a house in the village where the family liked to spend weekends. Fortunately, the surgery helped, and Margaret soon went on the mend. But then a new disaster happened, from which their family could not recover. The sudden death of Steve undermined the emotional state of Elizabeth, who did not know how to live on. Together with her husband, confidence in the future finally died in her. Elizabeth held on only for the sake of her son and old mother, who were always there and supported her, and now she was sitting in the kitchen, sipping tea, and thinking about how worthless life is. For many, worthlessness is the lack of money, career, personal life, and so on. But for Elizabeth, worthlessness consisted in a lack of purpose in life. Her aspirations and desires were shattered and broken in a crushing way on the day when she saw her husband's lifeless face. The woman hoped to the last that this was a terrible joke, a stupid medical mistake, and her Steve was actually alive. He will enter the house as before, pick up his son in his arms, and kiss his wife. A single tear rolled down her cheek from the old memories of a once happy life. Now the woman dreamed only of a good life. No, not for herself at all. Andrew and the old mother. That's who Elizabeth was thinking about in the first place. This thought was firmly rooted in her mind a couple of days ago after meeting with a classmate. She met Nancy quite by chance at the supermarket, where she ran in for a minute to get milk and fresh buns with raisins for Andrew. For a moment, she admired the woman who was walking towards her. Her confident, calm gait and the click of her heels made many men turn around. But the woman didn't seem to notice anyone around her. She was concentrating on choosing cheese, fruit, and a jar of caviar, putting the products in her basket. Elizabeth did not immediately recognize the stylishly dressed woman as a mischievous, ungainly girl with whom she sat at the same desk all her school years. No, Nancy was not a universally recognized beauty like Elizabeth, but there was something in her gaze that attracted men like a magnet. Styled hair, scarlet lipstick, expensive perfume, gold jewelry, and the latest iPhone model literally screamed about her solvency. With her manicured fingers, she traced the label on the expensive champagne, intently studying what was written. Then she neatly added the bottle to her purchases. Elizabeth felt embarrassed for her appearance, disheveled hair and dark circles under her eyes. She hurried past so as not to catch Nancy's eye, but accidentally caught the woman with her elbow. "Excuse me," Elizabeth apologized as she walked by, praying to all the gods that Nancy wouldn't recognize her. "It's okay, it happens," Nancy answered mechanically. But after looking closely at the face of a random passerby, she suddenly made a discovery for herself. "Elizabeth? Elizabeth Wilson, it's you! How many years? How many winters? Listen, I'm so glad to see you. Let's sit in a cafe and chat. Oh, only first, to the register. Otherwise, the guard is already looking suspiciously at us," Nancy hastily said in a voice that did not tolerate rejection. Her nimble fingers had already wrapped around Elizabeth's arm, and she was being led to the exit of the supermarket. "Hi, Nancy. You're still the same chatterbox." Elizabeth laughed sincerely for the first time in a long time. After ordering a latte and a tiramisu for two, Nancy talked incessantly about herself and her life. It turned out that she has her own business. She helped wealthy people find good servants who would carefully clean the mansions and keep quiet about what was happening outside their walls. She always liked to talk, and Elizabeth loved to listen. This was the secret of their school friendship. "Yes, that's enough about me. Tell me, how are you doing? Married? Are there any children?" "I was married, and now I'm a widow. An accident a year ago. My husband was hit by a car. Now I live with my mother and son Andrew. He's a smart boy growing up, and he will go to school this year." "God, I'm sorry. I didn't know." Nancy apologized hurriedly, even though she was a giggler, a gossip girl, and even a flirt. But no human emotion was foreign to her. "And are you working?" "No way. Without work experience, they'll only let me clean the floors," Elizabeth replied sharply. Floors. Now that's an idea." Nancy pondered. "Let me help you with the work. I have one customer here, and he urgently needs a maid, and as luck would have it, all the girls are busy." "Well, I don't even know if I can handle it." "Of course you can, because you've been awfully clean since childhood. Besides, he pays a lot of money, and your son is going to school this year, and your mother is old, you said yourself. So think carefully. You will work for a couple of months, and you will run around beauty salons and buy toys for the child." "Well, Nancy, you can even persuade a deaf person." "Okay, I agree," Elizabeth replied, thinking that a good salary would not hurt her in any way. "Believe me, this job will be like a breath of fresh air for you. It's a pleasure to put things in order in such houses. Crystal antiques, expensive paintings are everywhere, and if you try, you'll get some poor guy. Just choose prettier and richer, so you will become a hostess." "What are you saying? After Steve died, I don't even want to look at other men." "That's stupid. You are a young, beautiful woman. You also need to think about yourself, and your son still needs a father. For a boy, the example of a serious and accomplished man is extremely important." "Maybe you're right, but I'm not ready for a relationship yet." "Oh, Lizzie, what would you do without me? Well, never mind. We will quickly direct your life for the better. How nice it is to feel like a fairy godmother." "Nancy, but I have no one to leave my son to. Mom hasn't been feeling well lately, and it will be hard for her to sit with him. What to do? Advise me." I will talk to the customer and explain the whole situation. Perhaps he will allow you to move with your son." "Nan, you're great. I'm so grateful to you," Elizabeth exclaimed happily, feeling that life was beginning to improve. The next few days were agonizing, and waiting was the hardest for the young woman. Not knowing what to do with herself, she was rushing around the apartment like a tiger in a cage. Elizabeth already began to think that there was no meeting, and the sorceress named Nancy she just dreamed. When the phone rang in her apartment a few days later, Elizabeth rushed to the phone. Her whole life depended on the decision at the other end of the wire. "Well, Lizzie, congratulations to you. Now you're officially employed. Pack your things. You and your son are moving into John Clark's country house today, and tomorrow morning you start your direct duties." "Thank you, Nancy. From our whole family, thank you." "Don't thank me, don't. I should be thanking you. I've been looking for a friend like you, so come on, don't be sour, but get ready as soon as possible. John Clark doesn't like to wait." But Elizabeth didn't hear anything more. She was like a little girl floating in the clouds. Hurriedly packing her things, she circled around the room and hummed. "Lizzie, it's quite unexpected to see you in such a mood. Has something happened?" Elizabeth's mother asked, sincerely rejoicing for her daughter, who has never smiled since the day her husband died. "Mommy dear, life is getting better. I got a job." "Oh, I'm so happy for you, my daughter. I finally see you having fun. Trust me, Steve wanted you to be happy again. I loved your late husband like my own son, but he left us, and it was very painful for me to watch you depressed." "I'm sorry, Mom. I promise I won't hurt you," Lizzie agreed, realizing that she was bringing pain to her family with prolonged suffering. When a black foreign car picked up Elizabeth and Andrew in the evening, Elizabeth felt like Cinderella, who finally had a chance to go to the royal ball. The country mansion of J. Clark's was like a small medieval castle. A huge park, a small pond, shady alleys, along which it must be so pleasant to walk in good weather, drew Elizabeth's attention. The big gray building in which he and his son were to live did not look creepy and unfriendly at all. The polite and courteous owner of the mansion, a man slightly over 50 years old, was already expecting a new assistant around the house. The former maid could no longer handle her duties for health reasons. After learning that Elizabeth has a child, the man did not mind at all that she moved with her son. Despite his wealth and success in business, he was extremely unhappy. In his youth, he lost the woman he loved, with whom he felt so happy. Envious bridesmaids had slandered him, and the bride believed every word. Pride surged in John's heart, and he did not even try to keep his beloved. Years passed, and success and fame quickly came to him, but real, sincere love no longer knocked on his door. He got married twice, but all in vain. None of his wives could give him a long-awaited heir to whom he could transfer all his affairs. Disappointed in women, he plunged headfirst into work, and when he woke up, he realized that he had wasted my best years. He had houses, apartments, bank accounts, but did not have the most important thing, a big, strong, and loving family, which he dreamed of so much. Lizzie and her son immediately took root in his house. Children's laughter, the patter of Andrew's little feet, and Elizabeth's friendly smile filled the old mansion with light and warmth. Elizabeth cooked well and spoiled everyone with fragrant pastries on weekends. In his spare time, John was happy to tinker with the boy, imagining himself as a caring grandfather. He told him interesting stories about his travels, built a toy railway, and even performed the role of a horse, riding a little prankster on his back. From the outside, they looked like a real family. Yes, but it was impossible. Elizabeth's mother always said that her father was a pilot and crashed during an exercise. But one incident made Elizabeth doubt the truthfulness of her mother's words. One day, while cleaning the office, Elizabeth found her childhood photo on the desk. There could be no mistake. The card depicted a girl with an upturned freckled nose and dressed in a pretty canary-colored dress. But why is her picture here? Thinking about it, she got all worked up. Talking about his youth, John Clark mentioned a lover named Margaret, with whom he was divorced by a villainous fate. Was that woman her mother, and Lizzie his daughter? Thoughts did not give her rest, and then Elizabeth decided to invite her mother to the mansion. citing the fact that Andrew missed his beloved grandmother. The very next day, Margaret appeared in the house. At that moment, she still had no idea what kind of surprise fate would give her. "Mommy, tell me the whole truth. Who is my father, and did he die?" "Lizzie, why such questions? I've told you 100 times that he was a pilot." "But then what is my photo doing in John Clark's office?" "I see you've turned pale. You know that name, don't you?" "What did you have in common? Is he really my father?" "Daughter, calm down. Since you know everything, I'll tell you the truth. We really were a wonderful couple once. But after he cheated on me, our wedding didn't take place. I left him and then realized that I was pregnant. Out of anger, I wanted to get rid of the child, but at the last moment I changed my mind. Yes, Lizzie, he's your real father and Andrew's grandfather, but he is a terrible person, and it's better that you never see each other again." "Mom, I just found my father and you want to deprive me of him?" Elizabeth said angrily. "How could you hide the truth from me? He wasn't cheating on you at all. It's just that your girlfriends were jealous of your happiness, so they made it up, and you believed it. Fate itself brought us together." "Actually, it's not fate," a man's voice came from behind. "A year ago, I found out that my ex-lover secretly gave birth to a child from me. I've been looking for you all this time, Lizzie. And believe me, our meeting is not accidental. I am incredibly proud to have such a wonderful daughter and grandson. And you, Margot, forgive me. I was really loyal to you. I was young, stupid, and did not appreciate his happiness. Years have passed, but I still love you. Maybe we still have a chance for happiness. We may not be young anymore, but we have many wonderful moments ahead of us." "Darling, how stupid we were. I also love you more than life," Margaret replied, snuggling up to his sturdy shoulder. That's how fate gave two lovers a chance to be happy again. And Elizabeth has learned a simple truth for herself. There is no need to be afraid to love and to be loved. Love does not tolerate timidity. After all, tomorrow may never come. And she also knew for sure that Steve was looking at her from heaven and blessing her to try to be happy again.
The sun invaded the bedroom with its golden rays and reflected on Margaret's hair. Grayson held a tray in his hands. He walked carefully into the room. When he noticed his wife was still fast asleep, he stared at her blonde hair that radiated under the sun's rays. Her beautiful lashes were long and thick. Her lips were full and had a strawberry tint. He stood at the door still for more than 60 seconds, watched her without blinking. Finally, he entered the room and set the tray aside. He pecked her cheeks and she didn't even budge. Soon he deepened the kiss, and his ragged breath was the catalyst that woke her up. All along, she thought she was dreaming, yet the man was on her bed kissing her. She tried to push him away, but Grayson's muscular arms didn't bulge. He pried her lips open and inserted her tongue. Her mouth tasted a bit sour, but he loved it. Margaret bit his tongue, but he endured the pain. He slowly raised the duvet on her body, carefully climbed on the bed, and then pressed her while she tried to free herself. Soon Margaret stopped trying to push her husband away and started to move to meet his gentle yet intense thrust. Her moaning filled the room with warmth. It was like a melody to Grayson's ears. Grayson and Margaret had been married for 2.5 years, yet every day still felt like the first time he set eyes on her. Some years ago, a woman bashed into his car while trying to reverse. Other women would have stepped down from their car and apologized for their mistake, but Margaret did not. "Why is your car parked here?" Grayson felt his ears go red. The overdressed woman had bashed his car and was trying to push the blame on him. Grayson gouged her dress from head to toe and immediately knew she was one of those women trying to climb into his bed. He shook his head and looked at her with determination because he would teach her a lesson. He laughed dryly and said, "You think this lame joke of yours will get you into my bed? You must be dumb then. How dare you call me dumb?" Grayson sneered in his heart. He had seen countless women pretending to get close to him. "There's no way I will let you go unless you fix my car. I know you hit me on purpose. I've seen almost every girl throw hints at me, but none had dared to hit my car. Who the hell do you think you are? Boston women might be head over heels for you, but certainly not me. You certainly aren't my type, and I don't even know you. Fuck off. She yanked her hand from his wrist. She walked to her car and threw roughly $1,000 at him. There you go, broke boy. Fix your car. Grayson was shocked at how everything played out. Before he could get to his senses, Margaret entered her car and zoomed off. The following day, Grayson was on the headline again, but the headlines were different. Woman throws money at Boston's most eligible suitor. Billionaire Grayson forces woman to pay for car damages. Petty Grayson. Grayson forces woman to pay for car damage. The headlines were pretty outrageous. Margaret was in her office when her secretary informed her that the press had requested her. The media escalated the story and kept following her around. Eventually, she lost her job due to the pressmen's constant disruption at her place of work. For months, Margaret was forced to fake a relationship with Grayson for the media. Soon, it blossomed into a fully fledged love story. The couple stood up from the bed. Grayson carried Margaret into the bathroom. He cleaned her up in the bathroom, and while doing so, he felt heat rise in his body. Lately, Margaret had been punishing him sexually. Today, he was determined to make the most out of it. However, she felt something poke her. She demanded the sponge, but Grayson refused to hand it over. Soon, they started dragging the sponge. By the time Margaret decided to let go of the sponge, Grayson wasn't expecting it, so he lost his balance and fell. She tried to assist him and discovered that he was bleeding. She called for an ambulance, and he was rushed to hospital. At the hospital, Grayson's mom, Patricia, showed up. She looked at Margaret disdainfully. She never liked her from the day they met. She believes Mag's nagging would be the death of her son. She asked security to throw Mag out of the hospital and proceeded to take care of her son. In a few hours, Grayson woke up to find his mom by his bed. "Where's Maggie? You almost lost your life and all you can think of is Maggie? What's so good about her?" "Mom, it was a minor cut. I slipped while bathing." "You are trying to cover up that bitch. You've stayed in that house for years and never had an accident that required stitches. Your lawyer is standing outside. He has divorce papers with him. Sign it and move on with your life. Let's pay her off, then you can get married to Natasha." Grayson glared at his mom and removed the IV drip from his hands. The security men outside did not dare block his path when they saw him angry. "What are you doing? Grab him now," Patricia ordered the security men. Grayson was moving around the underground parking lot, hoping Maggie was still waiting around. A white Rolls-Royce parked before him. A frail-looking girl wearing a gown that showed her curves alighted the car. "Hello, Grayson. What do you want? Why do you keep acting like we are enemies? We grew up together, yet you never saw me as a woman." "Well, Natasha, I'm a married man." Maggie, who had been in the car waiting, decided to walk around the parking lot. When she alighted from the vehicle, she saw the most outrageous scene in her life. She saw Natasha move close to Grayson, and he didn't shove her away. Natasha wrapped her arms around Grayson's shoulders and whispered, "Your wife is a gold digger. If we offer her some money, she will leave. I truly love you." From Margaret's end, it seemed as though they were kissing. And before Grayson could reply to Natasha, Maggie was already behind the duo. Grayson suddenly pushed Natasha, and she fell. "Why did you push her? Weren't you enjoying a steamy session with your lover?" They heard a resounding clap from behind, which was coming from Patricia. Finally, she knows. Signing the divorce papers shouldn't be a problem now. "How dare you?" Maggie was furious and attempted to pounce on Patricia. Grayson held her back and kept fighting to free her from his grip. "Get your cheating hands off me, Grayson." He didn't budge and carried her into the car. "Grayson, tell me the truth and nothing but the truth now." "I would never leave you. I wedded you in the cathedral and said my vows before God and man, that I would stick with you till death do us part. Trust me." "Grayson, the lawyer was there, and you kissed Natasha." "My mom bought in the lawyer. She wanted me to sign the papers. Natasha was telling me to offer you money because she believes you are just with me for the money. We didn't kiss. She just suddenly held my shoulder and leaned close. Maggie laughed hysterically. "You must think I'm an idiot. Stop the car now." "No." She reached out for the wheel, and the car swept left and right as they both fought to control the wheel. When Grayson lifted his face to look at the road, the car ran into a truck. He knew if he suddenly stepped on the brake, the vehicle would somersault. He grabbed Margaret in his arms to shield her just before the car rammed into the truck. Margaret heard the blaring sound of both car horns before she became unconscious. Margaret had a few bruises. She didn't wake up until 1 week later because she was in shock. The smell of disinfectant invaded her nose and appalled her. Images of the accident flooded her mind. She remembered her husband had shielded her before the crash. She removed the IV and got out of bed. At the hospital reception, she heard the broadcaster mention the burial of a particular business mogul, Grayson Humphrey. Her eyes widened in shock. She quickly hailed a taxi to St. Mary's Cathedral. On her way, she kept praying the news shouldn't be true. When she entered the church, she saw Patricia paying her last respect. Immediately, both women saw each other and they froze. Mag ran to the coffin and collapsed before it. On the other hand, Patricia felt angry seeing the daughter-in-law she was dissatisfied with. "Wench, I told my son he would be the end of you. Yet he didn't listen. It would help if you were satisfied since he is dead. Somebody kick her out of this place." Patricia yelled at Margaret. Margaret went back home devastated. Everything in their home was just as they had left it. The breakfast Grayson served was still lying on the table. His clothes were everywhere. She felt his warm hands caress her abdomen and whispered, "Let's make." She tried to hold those hands, but they were not there. She cried profusely until she fell asleep. It's been 2 weeks since Grayson's burial. When she noticed she was running out of food, she managed to visit the shopping mall, only to discover all the cards Grayson had given had been blocked. She knew Patricia was behind it. For a week plus, all she did was cry herself to sleep, eat chocolate, drink water, then cry again. She had no clue where her life was currently headed. She knew she had become a poor widow, with just a house filled with memories of her husband. "Gray, can you get me some chocolates?" she asked from her sleep. And when she woke up, she discovered she was dreaming about him again. She walked into the kitchen to pick up some chocolates and found she had exhausted them. Inside the jar, she saw an envelope. She had never picked her chocolates before. Gray's duty had always been, and he performed the task excellently. She tore the envelope and found a letter in it. It was a letter from Grayson. It read, "Dear Maggie, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to watch you curl up and sleep. I love you, and that won't change. Maggie, if you found this envelope, I'm no longer by your side. You never get a bar of chocolate yourself since we got married. Whenever I take a bar of chocolate from the jar, I pray to God that you never get chocolates yourself one day. My mom would always say, Margaret will be your end. Maggie, in your stead, will I happily die over and over again. I shield you from the world. I'd stand against nations and anyone who dares to speak hate of you. My feelings for you are unexplainable. Even now, I long to caress you. You hate me when I'm clingy, but it was the only way I thought of showing you how much you mean to me. I was too afraid to lose even a nanosecond away from you. My promise to you is, in another world, I'd be waiting to have you again as my lawfully wedded, beautiful, and nagging wife. My love for you is unconditional and never-ending. You are the brightness in my life and the meaning behind my smile. I hope I was able to prove how much I love you. P.S. Check the envelope and you'd find another paper. Take it to the bank and you'd be paid monthly for as long as you live. Your loving and daring husband." At this point, Margaret broke down in tears. She realized how she had cheated herself. She knew deep down she spent all her time with Grayson, whining about petty things rather than enjoying and living in the moment. Death, how cruel are you? Grayson, what will I do with all of the money when you are not here?